So for this project, we're going to go from this original image, which has nice pretty scenery, but a little distracting. And I want to draw the eyes to the girls here about to go whitewater rafting. So we're going to create a simulated depth of field effect by blurring out the background and leaving only them in view. So simple enough. Let's go ahead and jump over to our project. Command J to jump the background to a new layer. And that way we've got our original image. Now I need to select our subject, select subject to give me a good starting point. It's not always perfect, but it did a pretty good job in this case. But in this case, I don't just want them. I actually also want the raft to be in view. In this case, if I switch to my quick selection tool, so my quick selection tool with the W key, then I can actually, I'm going to use my bracket keys, my right bracket to make this blow up in size, hold my shift key down so that I can start adding to the selection. So I'm just going to sweep around here. You see it's doing a pretty quick and great job. Oops, got a little bit too much there. No problem. We can come back and fix that. I want to make sure I get this side of this as well. And I'm going to need to go with a much smaller brush. Hold down my Option key. Oops. Hold down my Shift key. And I don't want quite that much. So maybe make this a little bit smaller. And there we go. So now I'm just getting that edge. And of course, I can always come in and use my other tools to refine this edge a little bit. Let's get a little bit more of that hair. Maybe a little bit more Symphony's hair here. Okay, and then we don't want this water, so I'm going to hold my Option key down and eliminate that. But let's just try to add back just a tiny little bit of that. So now we've got all of the girls selected and none of the background. So I'm going to go ahead and do a quick Shift Command J, and that's going to copy this up to a new layer. So now, oops, I noticed we didn't quite get all of it, so I'm going to undo till I'm back and make sure I get this. So shrink my selection down, make sure I've got my quick select, and now I can click to add that in. Oops, got a little bit of this water I don't need. There we go. And that looks much better. Now, if I just Command J and copy that up to a new layer, you'll see if I turn off the bottom one, that this is what we have. Now with this bottom one, I'm just going to rename it Blur just so I can keep track of it. And now with this blur layer selected, I can go to Filter, Blur, and pick the Gaussian blur. And the Gaussian blur is going to give me the option of a nice simple blur. And I could either pull this radius down, so it's just barely blurring the background, which is nice. If I go way too extreme, it blurs it into oblivion. So we can just try to find a nice little balance of blurred background with the girl still being in focus. So blurring that background, I'm going to hit OK. And now I can see the difference between what I started with and where I'm at now. And that creates a very natural little depth of field effect to where we can see them bright and clear, but the background is just a little more out of focus and not as distracting. So it draws the eyes more towards the girls. Now we could certainly go in and add more things like an adjustment layer to them. So if I wanted to maybe make them a bit brighter, I'm going to Command click on them so that selection is remade. And now I can go and maybe add a little vibrance layer and maybe pump their saturation up just a little bit, just to get them a little more saturated. And I do like the idea of adding a little more vibrance to the background layer. So I can actually just hold my Option key down and drag that, but you're going to notice that vibrance is still masked, so it's only affecting this thing below. So let's go ahead and hold our Option key down, hover between this vibrance layer, and click that so that it's clipped to only this layer. And then for this one, I want it to only affect the blur layer. So I'm going to Option click that until we see this little downward pointing arrow. And then for this one, I'm just going to invert that mask. So when I invert it, now when I make any changes on this, Command I inverted the mask. And now when I adjust this vibrance, select that. And if I push that saturation up, you'll notice that only the trees in the background are being affected. So very bright, vivid green. I can push that vibrance up and really get that bright background. Now I could go the other way. If I wanted to make the background completely desaturated, it'd be a very different image. But as it is, I still like this green background. I'm going to give it a nice amount of pump. And now when I switch to my original layer, here's what it looks like. And when I switch back, we've got a much better looking image. Very good. And that is how we can create a simulated depth of field.